Picture this, you've just gotten everything you ever wanted, the promotion, the apartment, the number in your bank account that you used to dream about when you were eating instant noodles at midnight, telling yourself one day it'll be different, one day it'll feel like something, and now that day is here, you're standing in the middle of everything you built. And there's this silence inside you, this hollow, aching quiet that doesn't make sense, because from the outside your life looks exactly like success. People tell you they're proud, your parents finally stopped worrying, your Instagram looks like someone who figured it out, but at night when the noise goes away and it's just you, there's this whisper, soft but persistent. A question you're almost too afraid to ask out loud. Is this it? And the worst part isn't the emptiness. The worst part is the guilt that comes right after it, because you know there are people who have less, you know you're supposed to be grateful, you tell yourself to be grateful, and you genuinely are, but the emptiness doesn't care about gratitude. It stays, it lingers. It sits with you in the car after a meeting where everyone clapped. It finds you in the shower after a successful launch. It waits for you at dinner tables where people are celebrating you. You smile, you say thank you, and inside nothing moves. If you've ever felt this, if this quiet emptiness inside success sounds familiar, then I want you to know something before we go any further. You are not broken, you are not ungrateful, you are not weak, you are carrying something that was placed inside you a long time ago, something that has nothing to do with your achievements and everything to do with why you started achieving in the first place. Today we're going to sit with that. Let's go back, not to your first job, not to your first big achievement. Let's go back further, to a child. Maybe 7 years old, maybe 9, maybe 5. A child who learned very early that love was not a given, love was earned. Not through simply existing, not through being, but through doing, through performing, through being good enough, quiet enough, impressive enough to deserve the warmth that every child is supposed to receive just for being alive. Maybe your parents were strict, maybe they withheld affection not out of cruelty, but because that's what they were taught, that praise spoils children, that toughness builds character. Maybe your household was unpredictable, and doing well in school was the one thing that made the air softer, the tension smaller, the love available, or maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. Maybe there was no abuse, no trauma, no obvious wound. Maybe your parents worked hard and were simply absent. Physically present but emotionally far away, and in their absence, you learned to fill the silence with achievement, because achievement got you noticed, achievement got you seen, and somewhere in that learning something got wired incorrectly. Psychologists call this conditional positive regard, a term introduced by humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers. It describes what happens when a child's sense of worth becomes tied not to who they are but to what they do. When love feels like a transaction, when approval is a currency you have to keep earning, the child who grows up under conditional positive regard doesn't just want to succeed. They need to, not for joy, not for curiosity, but for survival. Because deep in the nervous system, in the oldest, most primal part of the brain, achievement became the answer to the question, am I safe? Am I loved? Do I belong here? Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology by psychologists Jennifer Henderlong Corpus and Mark Lepper found that children who are consistently praised for performance rather than effort develop what's called contingent self-esteem. Their self-worth becomes entirely dependent on external outcomes. When they win, they feel worthy. When they fail even slightly, the floor drops away beneath them. The problem is that this child grows up, the child becomes you, and you carry that wiring into every boardroom, every relationship, every quiet moment alone. The achievement engine keeps running because somewhere inside, the child still believes that stopping means disappearing. But here's what nobody tells you about achievement engines. They are built to run, not to arrive. There is a concept in psychology called the arrival fallacy, described by Harvard lecturer and author Tal Ben-Shahar. It's the illusion that once we reach a certain destination, once we cross a specific threshold, we will finally feel okay, we will finally feel whole, the promotion will fix it, the million will fix it, the house, the title, the accolades. They will fill the hollow, but they never do, because the hollow wasn't created by a lack of achievement. It was created by a lack of something that no achievement can replace, being loved for who you are, not for what you do. And so the cycle continues. You reach the goal. The feeling is brief, sometimes warm, sometimes just relief, sometimes just numbness, and then the goalpost moves. Because the part of you that's running isn't trying to achieve greatness, it's trying to outrun a feeling, it's trying to prove something to someone who may not even be watching anymore. Research from the American Psychological Association found that individuals with high contingent self-esteem, people whose worth depends on achievement, show significantly higher levels of anxiety, depression, and emotional volatility than those with stable, unconditional self-esteem. They experience sharper highs and deeper lows, and crucially, they adapt faster to success, meaning the joy from achievement fades more rapidly for them than for others. Your brain literally stops registering success as meaningful because success has become the baseline, the new normal, the minimum requirement of your own existence. So the emptiness isn't a malfunction. It's the logical result of a system that was designed to keep moving, not to rest, not to feel, not to be, but to keep moving. Now, let's talk about what this actually looks like in your life, because I want you to see yourself in this, not as a clinical case, but as a human being whose patterns finally make sense. You might struggle to rest, not because you're lazy, but because your nervous system has never fully learned how. Rest feels dangerous, rest feels irresponsible, rest feels like you're falling behind. When you do nothing, you feel like you are nothing. So you fill every gap, you schedule every hour, you optimize, you plan, you produce, and even in vacation, even on the beach, even on a Sunday morning, there's a quiet hum of anxiety underneath the stillness, a voice that says you should be doing something. You might be deeply uncomfortable receiving compliments land awkwardly, you deflect them, you minimize them. Someone says you're brilliant, and something in you wants to list all the ways you're not, because somewhere inside you don't fully trust praise that isn't tied to a recent performance. Praise without evidence feels like a mistake. Kindness without reason feels like debt. You might feel like an imposter, not just in the classic sense, but in a deeper, more personal way. Not just wondering if people will find out you don't know enough, but wondering if they'll find out there's nothing underneath the competence, that behind the title and the track record and the clean, polished version of you, there's just a tired child who learned to perform very well. Think about this. When was the last time you let someone see you fail? Really fail. Not the inspiring "I failed and learned" narrative, but just failure. Messy, unresolved, without a redemption arc attached. Most high achievers can't remember, because failure doesn't just feel like information. It feels like identity. It feels like proof of something they've been afraid is true all along. You might have built your entire identity around what you do, so much so that you genuinely don't know who you are without it. Ask yourself, if you couldn't work, couldn't achieve, couldn't produce anything for a year, who would you be? What would remain? Most people who live inside this pattern go quiet when they hear that question. Because the honest answer is terrifying, because they're not sure anything would remain. This is what psychologists call identity foreclosure, when a person adopts a fixed identity, often performance-based, without ever fully exploring who they are beneath it. You became the achiever, the over-deliver, the one who always comes through, and it happens so early and so completely that it never occurred to you to ask whether you chose it, whether it was you or whether it was armor. And here's where it gets deeply painful, because this doesn't stay in the office. It follows you home, it sits at the dinner table, it sleeps in your bed. In relationships, you might struggle with intimacy, not physical intimacy, but the raw, unglamorous kind. The kind where someone sees you without your performance, the kind where there's no accomplishment to hide behind, where you're just a person, sitting with another person, being. You might find that kind of closeness beautiful in theory and absolutely unbearable in practice, because vulnerability without a safety net, without something to point to and say, "At least I'm good at this," feels like standing on the edge of something very high. You might attract relationships that mirror the original wound, where you work hard to earn love, where affection feels conditional, where you become smaller or larger depending on what's needed, not because you're self-destructive, but because conditional love is the map you were given. It's the only love that felt real. The love you didn't have to work for almost seems suspicious. You might also be deeply, privately lonely, not for lack of people. You may be surrounded by people, but for lack of being truly known. Because when you've spent your life presenting a polished, capable, impressive version of yourself, even the people who love you most may be loving a performance, a beautiful, well-rehearsed, exhausting performance that you can never fully step down from. Because if you step down, if you show the underneath, what if they leave? What if the love was always for the performance, not the performer? That fear, that specific fear, that is the hollow. It's not emptiness, it's the ache of a self that has never been fully allowed to exist. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. It sounds simple, it is not simple. Because becoming who you truly are requires, first, that you stop being who you were trained to be. And for people who build their entire lives, their entire sense of safety on being a certain kind of person, that is not a step, that is a demolition. Here's the invisible truth, that most conversations about success and emptiness Miss, the emptiness is not the problem. The emptiness is information. It is the self, your actual self, your original self, the self that existed before the conditioning knocking on a door that has been locked for a very long time. The emptiness is not telling you that you failed. It is telling you that something in you is hungry for something that no achievement has ever actually fed. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to develop logotherapy, the psychology of meaning, wrote that human beings can endure almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. But he also observed something quietly devastating, that the most prosperous societies often produce the most profound emptiness, because prosperity without meaning is just noise. Achievement without identity is just motion. We've built cultures that celebrate the doing and ignore the being. We have awards for performance and no language at all for the experience of simply existing, of being alive without producing anything, without proving anything, without becoming anything more than you already are in this exact moment, and you absorbed that culture. You internalized it at an age when you had no defense against it. At an age when you could not separate the message from the truth. But here is the paradox, and I want you to sit with this. The very qualities that created your emptiness are also the qualities that made you extraordinary. The hypervigilance that gave you anxiety also gave you perception. The need to perform that exhausted you also gave you discipline. The emotional sensitivity that made you lonely also made you the person that others feel deeply understood by. Your wound and your gift are not separate things. They came from the same source, and that doesn't mean you have to stay wounded to stay gifted. It means that healing is not the destruction of what you are, it is the liberation of it. The same river, finally allowed to flow where it actually wants to go. We're moving through something important here. Stay with me, I want to be careful. Here, because I'm not going to give you a list of things to do. Not because healing doesn't involve action, it does, but because the most important part of what comes next isn't a technique. It's a permission to be insufficient, to be still, to take up space without earning it, to rest without a reason, to exist in the full, messy, unproductive, deeply human weight of your own life. Not as a project to be optimized, but as a life to be lived. Healing begins not with doing more, but with witnessing yourself, with becoming curious rather than critical about the patterns you've been living. Not why am I broken, but what was I trying to protect? What did this behavior allow me to survive? Because the achiever in you was never the enemy. The achiever in you was a child in a difficult situation, doing the absolute best they could with what they had, that deserves compassion, not dismantling compassion. You can begin gently, slowly to notice the moments when you are performing versus when you are present, when you are doing to earn love versus doing because it genuinely moves you. Those are different experiences in the body. One has a held quality, a breath that doesn't fully release, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The other has a looseness, a sense of being in your own life rather than narrating it from outside. And you can begin in the small moments to practice worthiness without achievement, to let someone see you without armor, to say I don't know when you don't know, to let a day be ordinary and still feel like enough, not because you fixed anything but because you've chosen, in this small moment, to trust that you don't have to fix anything to deserve to be here. The research on this is clear. Psychologist Kristen Neff at the University of Texas, whose decades of work on self-compassion show that treating yourself with the same gentleness you would offer a good friend, not in spite of your failures, but specifically in the presence of them, is one of the most powerful predictors of psychological resilience and authentic well-being. Not confidence, not achievement, compassion. The hollow doesn't fill with more, it fills with depth, it fills with truth, it fills with the slow, quiet, revolutionary act of finally being who you are without apology, without performance, without a single thing to prove. Remember that child, the one who learned that love had to be earned, the one who practiced being impressive before they practiced being themselves. You can go back to them. Not to change what happened, you can't, but to tell them something they were never told. You were always enough, before the grades, before the awards, before the title and the track record and the version of you that the world learned to celebrate. In the beginning, before any of that, you were enough, just by being here, just by being you. The success was never the point was always you. Now stop running and come home.